When it comes to evaluating the Baltimore Ravens draft this year, I have to keep a couple of things in mind. Number one, that because Ozzie Newsome is the guy calling the shots, some people are automatically going to view his draft classes as being great no matter what they do or don't do. Just a reputation earned over years of good work. And you know, if anybody's earned it, I guess Ozzie Newsome has. I also have to keep in mind, though, that last year I was really not a big fan of their draft class. I really wasn't. I liked C.J. Mosley as a prospect, but I thought he was a bit of a reach for them there, and I didn't really think he made a whole lot of sense. And, you know, frankly, I was wrong about that. You know, it ended up being a good draft class for them with C.J. Mosley and Timmy Jernigan and so on and so forth. Look at that, and I have to keep that in mind, too, as I'm trying to evaluate the Ravens' performance in the 2015 NFL Draft. When you look at the Ravens, though, to me, this is a team that, you know, is close to, I guess you could say, to being a contender, a team that's consistently in the mix. But this is a team that is also getting old, too, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and has gotten really old. And at some point in time, they have to be able to replenish again via the draft, and they need to do so quicker than maybe a lot of people envision. Because otherwise, in my opinion, the Ravens could be due for a big step back, in particular on the defensive side of the ball, sooner rather than later. Because while the 2014 draft produced relatively well for them, I thought the couple of drafts previous before that weren't that particularly great. So there is a bit of a void there in the overall talent and something that needs to be addressed, and that hole needs to be plugged in. And when I look at the Ravens draft in 2015, I understand what they were doing. I see the philosophy. I see where they were going. And I don't have a lot of major gripes ultimately with what they did. In the first round, taking Breshad Perriman, the wide receiver from Central Florida, you know, you're picking 26th in round number 1. At that point in time, you're gambling on speed and athletic upside. And Lord knows that Breshad Perriman has a ton of that. You're also factoring in you've got an old Steve Smith. Torrey Smith is gone. No other real, you know, viable options at wide receiver. It was one of those situations where maybe they felt the board matched up with their need, and that's where they went. Was Perryman the best player on my board at this particular point in time? No. Do I view him in a lot of ways as just like another Torrey Smith, and you basically let a Torrey Smith go to have to burn a first-round pick on a guy that's like him in a lot of ways? Yes, and sometimes I don't really understand why a team would necessarily do that. But, like I said, I do get the choice of Breshad Perriman. Personally, if I was the Ravens, if I was going to go wide receiver here, I would have went with Devin Smith from Ohio State. I think he's a more polished player and could do more things. But I understand it and I get it. They were gambling on athletic upside and they were picking in late round 1, so it is what it is. What makes the Perryman pick a little more easy for me to, you know, to tolerate or accept is the performance of the Ravens on day 2 of the draft in particular, but, you know, even the beginning portion of day number 3 and round number 4, I thought the Ravens really did themselves some major favors in that portion of the draft. To be able to sit there and get Maxx Williams, the hands-down best tight end in this draft, at the tail portion of round number 2 and just only have to move up a few picks to be able to get that, I thought was a huge coup, and was a big-time steal. This is a team where you can't really count on Dennis Pitta. Owen Daniels is gone. They need a weapon. They need another option there for Joe Flacco. You know, because otherwise you basically got Steve Smith, and that's about it. Now you've brought in Perryman in round 1. Now you bring in the best all-around tight end in this draft, and Maxx Williams, and you got him at the tail end of round number 2, where a lot of people were thinking that maybe he would have a chance to sneak into the bottom couple of picks of round number 1. These are the type of picks that Ozzie Newsome seems to be able to find once or twice every single draft. These are the type of picks that keep the Ravens relevant and competitive year in and year out. And then I look at round 3 with them getting Carl Davis, the defensive lineman from Iowa. He could bulk up some and play some nose in their 3-4. He could play most likely a 5 technique end in their 3-4. Here's a guy that has all that physical talent, but his effort, his desire, have been called into question. But again, you're getting a guy like this in round number 3. How much of a gamble or risk is it really? At this point in time, you are trying to gamble on high upside athletic guys that fit what you do on defense, and Carl Davis definitely fits into that category and fits into that mold. A guy from a physical standpoint that had first round talent. That ended up, to me, again, being a bit of a value or a bit of a steal here for the Ravens in round number 3. And I even look at round number 4. They got some more depth at running back with Buck Allen out of USC. Now, is he a guy that's going to come in and compete with Talifero and Forsett for some carries right away? Perhaps. He's a guy that I think will at least have a role right away. And Za'Darius Smith, the edge rusher from Kentucky, he'll probably have to bulk up some if he's going to play end in the 3-4. He could stay at his current size and be that bigger 3-4 outside linebacker that the Ravens like to employ. I like this pick a lot because as much as the focus was on Bud Dupree at Kentucky, there were times I look at Za'Darius Smith and I thought he was the more polished, pure football player. And again, looking at a guy like this in round number 4, these are value picks. These are guys that don't always develop to be starters, but they can become valuable contributors in situations and in sub-packages, and these are guys that can be the meat and potatoes of your organization. I thought it was overall a good, solid draft for the Baltimore Ravens. While I would have maybe went with a different wide receiver at number 26. I understand why the Ravens went with that receiver at number 26, and most especially why they went with that position. In terms of their best pick to me, though, it has to be Maxx Williams. Like I said, a guy with borderline round 1 talent they were able to get damn near at the end of round number 2. And what I really like about that with the Ravens is he got to a certain point in round number 2, and the Ravens knew he was their guy and sat there and said, we're not going to fucking take the chance. It's worth giving up a pick or two to move up a couple of spots to make sure we get our guy. That's what you have to do. Don't roll the dice. Don't take chances. It gets to a certain point. You know he's your guy, and he was rated much higher than where he's actually at in the draft. Then you've got to get him, and that's exactly what they did. In terms of players that could surprise, I look at guys like Carl Davis and Za'Darius Smith and even Buck Allen. I think these are all guys that could potentially develop into long-term starters for the Baltimore Ravens and will really make this draft class look very good 2 to 3 years down the road. Like I said, the biggest thing I second-guess about this draft for the Ravens is probably Breshad Perriman. And again, I don't hate the pick. It's just I don't like it as much for them as if they would have taken somebody like, let's say, a Devin Smith. And, we'll see if I ultimately am right or wrong. Based off of some of the other players that were taken at the tail end of round number 1 after the Ravens pick, Perriman made some sense here. Like I said, maybe they could have addressed offensive line depth here a little bit. That was something I thought that could have been worked on. They could have maybe spent an earlier pick on a defensive back. Some of you might have sat there and said instead of taking Perriman in round number 1, they could have went with somebody like a Byron Jones from UConn, and again, that would have made some sense too. But I'll give the Ravens a grade of like a B- here, because I thought, again, that they had a really good, solid meat and potatoes middle of the draft. Really, really good. I thought it was better than most. And this is the type of draft that the Ravens needed to have. I expect them to get a lot of contributions out of this class long term and probably get some nice contributions right away in 2015.